Good evening. This is Donna and Michael Husteler, continuing our presentation on finances for Montessori schools in the era of COVID-19. We apologize for the late delivery of this video. There's been some family issues, but we'll get ready to get started. I'm going to do a lot of reading off the slides, which I sort of apologize for, but it's things that I want to do. Where we were when we get cut off and the Zoom meeting stopped, we were talking about asking whether you were the numbers person of your business, asking who was responsible for your budgeting and planning, things that you need to think about if you're going to be working with the finance of the business. Have you learned how to read a basic profit and loss statement for your business, and do you think that's important for you? Do you know whether you make money or don't make money within the business? Do you have a financial forecast or a budget for your business, and how often do you look at it, and how often do you compare if you're on track for that budget, or if you're over or under what that budget is? What numbers within your business do you consider important? And do you have someone that you can provide another set of eyes who understands your business? If you're a not-for-profit, is there a treasurer or a finance person on your board who really understands the numbers? If you're a for-profit company that you founded, do you have a board of advisors, or do you have someone who you can talk to that can provide you with information if you're not a numbers person and you're not really someone who can do these numbers for your business? From our perspective, what numbers do you need to know? We think it's very important that you understand your fixed and variable costs, the cost of running your school. What does that mean? What's a variable cost? What's a fixed cost? A fixed cost, for example, is rent. It's a cost that's due every month. It is usually the same amount of money every month. Other things that are fixed costs, they aren't necessarily fixed in terms of not changing, but your fixed costs would include your utilities. They are things that you really can't control. Fixed costs would include your liability insurance. They might include your workers' compensation insurance. They might include a lease on a copy machine. Those kinds of things you would consider your fixed costs. Variable costs are things that are easier to change. I emphasize the word easier, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're easy. Variable costs would include the salaries that you pay to people, might include the benefits that you pay them, whether you offer a 401k, whether you offer any kind of health or dental insurance. Those are variable costs. The materials you spend in a classroom every month, or at the beginning of the year, costs that you don't necessarily have to spend. Maybe the classroom doesn't run as well, but maybe you don't replace a pink tower that is starting to look a little bit worn, or maybe you're doing a little bit tighter with how you're spending money. So that's something you might not spend. That's a variable cost. Another variable cost that's oftentimes thought of is professional development. Are you going to continue in the period of financial troubled times? Are you going to be able to continue to do the professional development and have that kind of budget? So those are variable costs. The reason that this is important is you have to know what costs that you have to cover to keep your school open and solvent. If you don't pay your rent, you're liable to not have a school anymore because your landlord is not necessarily going to allow you to stay in the school. If you own the school building, you're going to have a problem with your lender in terms of making the mortgage payments. If you go in default on your mortgage, I don't know that the lender is necessarily going to give you the same amount of flexibility that he might give someone who owns a residence. So if your home is in default on a mortgage, you may have more flexibility than if the business building that you own is in trouble. So it's important to have knowledge of what these costs are and make sure that you have enough money to keep your school solvent and cover the fixed costs. The relationships between costs are also important. So how does enrollment affect staffing, especially as you reopen, and what costs affect your bottom line? So again, payroll, benefits, etc. What things can you cut and still keep your school running? Minimums and maximums. At what point does it make sense to close a classroom, and how much can you afford to spend on modifications? I'll give an example. When we first opened our school about 20 years ago, we ran a calculation and we determined that to pay the salaries of the teachers and the assistants in the classroom, we needed to have 12 students paying tuition to cover that variable cost. And until we covered those salaries, we had no money to contribute towards rent. We had no money to contribute towards utilities. We were basically, until we got to 12 students, we were actually losing money and having a classroom open. It's important for you to know what that break even is for your classroom. As you grow open, as more students start to want to come back to the classroom, if you don't have enough students in a classroom to pay the variable costs, you're not contributing your fixed costs. And you have to take some serious considerations of whether you want to stay open in that environment. Another question that you might have is, do you have a budgeting model that works? And does it reflect the most important aspects of your business? would allow you to make simple changes to arrive at a new bottom line. Does your budget model look at scholarships? Does it look at discounts? Does it look at changing compensations or benefits? If you change the staffing that you've got, if you have to add a different teacher because your teacher chose not to come back after the school opens in the fall, have you got the ability to change the compensation you're paying a different teacher? Do you know how to use it and how often to use it? And when was the last time you looked at that budget? Are you using that budgeting tool to forecast what you need to know when you're going to open? Another important variable is cash. How much accessible cash do you have now? And accessible cash is cash in bank accounts, in savings accounts, in credit unions, and places like that. A certificate of deposit might not be accessible. A scholarship fund that you have might not be accessible until the students are actually in the school getting the scholarships. Where is your money and can you access it? How much do you need until parents start paying again? Can you continue to pay your rent? Can you pay your utilities even if you're not paying staff or if your staff is temporarily on unemployment? Another question you might ask is how long can you survive if a percentage of the families decide not to return? That goes back to what I said in the earlier slide. If you have only 11 students coming back and the break even for your classroom is 15 students, what are you going to do about that? And how many families can you lose and still make it? There was a period in time in the 2008 to 2010 period where that was a very important question for us because sometimes we got to the point where losing students made very, very hard to keep a classroom open. And if you can cut expenses, know where you can cut those expenses. Look at the variable expenses that maybe you don't contribute to the classroom staying open or expenses that can be deferred for 3 to 6 months and pick up those expenses later. And then last but not least, where you might get more cash to tide you over in this period of time when cash flow is difficult. Cash resources, I looked today on the internet, the SBA's website, and PPP loans are still available. In fact, the flow of cash out of the PPP loans right now is negative. There are actually more people paying off these loans than are asking for the money. So if you find yourself have not gotten a PPP loan and think you need one, those funds are still available. And the emergency EIDL loans are still also available if you want to fill out that paperwork. Sometimes a line of credit from a bank can be tapped. We have a small line of credit for our school. You may have a similar kind of situation. You're better off paying 7 or 8% interest on a line of credit than not be able to pay some of the fixed costs that you've got to keep your school open. You can certainly talk to a banker or a credit union and see if you can put a new mortgage on the existing business that would give you cash to operate. May be difficult longer term, but if you don't have a longer term, you don't have to worry about whether it's difficulty. Parent prepayments are important, and there'll be a discussion on Thursday of this week. They're talking about ways of doing tuition and way of getting prepayments and things for parents, and I think that would be a very important piece of information for all of you to have. And finally, doing whatever annual fundraising you do and whatever you might do, such as a silent auction or other ways to raise money from parents, you might want to think about having those annual fundraising events happen earlier in the year than they typically do. Again, the latest information that we have, and some of this stuff has changed, but the PPP loan forgiveness program, the banks in Congress are calling for PPP forgiveness, blanket forgiveness on smaller loans. We have heard companies tell us and people tell us that if you're under $2 million in PPP loans, that the bank itself will be involved in making that decision, not the SBA, and the SBA won't be working through it. You'll get a copy of this presentation from Qasim, and this website, sba.gov, gives you details about the forgiveness application and the forms that you'll have to fill out. Right now, based on what's going around, it appears you'll have until the end of October to complete the form. My opinion is if you file later in the year, you'll be in a bigger stack of paper with the same amount of staffing, and they may have less time to review your paperwork. So I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I might wonder that making the filing later might be a better strategy than filing it in August or September when the pile of paper of people filing those loan forgiveness papers is smaller. Meet with your accountant to discuss how this should be reported on your taxes as well. I've seen a couple of schools over the last couple of weeks, and I think with 7 schools that I've been looking at some of their finances, and only one of those schools has actually put that PPP loan onto their formal financial reports on their balance sheet. So talk to your accountant and figure out how you want to report on these taxes. It's very important that it be handled correctly.
And early.
And early, yes. The EIDL, the first 10,000 could show up. Oh, yeah, this is, Donna, you want to explain this? Go on that one? The EIDL, what you experienced?
Yeah, so on the call last week, we were talking about this because the first 10,000 of the EIDL can just show up in your account. That's what happened with us. I went into the bank one day and went, wait. How did I end up with more money? There's nobody's paying. And then when I went in and looked at the detail, there was a $10,000 deposit with absolutely no detail except a little number that included the letters SBA. No paperwork, no signing, no, here are the conditions, no nothing. $10,000 shows up in my account. And it wasn't until about 4 weeks later that I got an email from the SBA saying, we're still working on your loan and you should be getting paperwork to sign shortly. And I thought, oh my gosh, wait, don't give me more money. I don't even know if I want more money. So, and then on the call, we said that to somebody and literally they went into their bank account at that moment and discovered that sure enough, they got the 10,000 too and didn't even notice it. The last thing you want to know 6 months from now is you got that $10,000 grant and you didn't account for it because it's really special. It's considered special money and you have to keep detailed records of what you did with it. So if you apply for an EIDL, be sure to look for a $10,000 deposit that just shows up unannounced. And the other thing is the original paperwork that came out with the PPP loan said that if you received the $10,000 grant part of the EIDL, that you would not, that would not be a grant any longer. It would be a pure loan. There's discussion right now about whether or not they're going to be that hard on us or whether they're truly going to let us keep that 10,000 as a loan. But until that time, assume that it's a loan. At least I would recommend you assume that it's a loan, and record any and all expenses against it, or maybe even set it aside if you don't need it to decide, do I really need a $10,000 loan? And while I'm on that subject, if you got the PPP loan, hopefully you put it into a separate account, even if it's a savings account, someplace where every interaction with it is recorded, so that every time you take money out or every time you put money in, it shows exactly what you did with it, because those are the kinds of things you're going to need to get that approved or forgiven.
The last point in the slide is I have a very close friend. I've worked with the SBA in Phoenix, Arizona for over 10 years, and I am friends with the senior lending officer for the Arizona district for the SBA. And when Donna got the EIDL unexpectedly, I wrote an email to Craig and I asked him what was going on. And basically, he's pulling his hair out. The SBA is really overwhelmed right now. He's working here locally, and he's not exactly sure when it will all come together. He said just roll with it. That's what he's doing. They're working 16-hour days trying to keep up with this. Congress is making changes to rules faster than the SBA can really keep up with it. So be patient with them. They're trying to be patient with you at the same time. Okay. What else you might want to know? We've worked with, like I said, 7 schools, understanding some of their finance of their business. Many of the heads of school that I talk to appreciate assistance in understanding the finance of their business. Some don't, most do. Most schools don't have a toolkit to evaluate the effects of various reopening scenarios. Most of them haven't really thought about where they're going in the future. I know that Laurel had a short, I guess, promotional speech last Thursday when she talked about working with me and this program that I have called Profit Sense. It's been really helpful. I also found that the budget model that Don has been using for Alabama Montessori was a help to 4 or 5 of the 6 or 7 schools that I talked to. And so a simple budgeting model can provide you with information in a short period of time. And it's really simple, just a basic knowledge of Excel or a spreadsheet program. And those pieces of information I'm happy to share with you. And using the budget model really doesn't even require you to get in touch with us. We've taken all the personal information out of it, and we'd be happy to send to you that information and send you that file and let you see if it's an improvement over what you're working with today. We're happy to do that. So if you need more help, I run a small business coaching business. I'm retired. I don't do a lot of it, but I do have a small business coaching. I've offered to the members of the town hall the models for the budgeting and financial forecast for free. I've also done, I will also give you advice on that model, and I will also run for you at my expense the profit sense model that I own that builds a 5-year forecast for your business, something that will be very useful for you once you get back on your feet and once all this stuff starts to go away. And again, I'm more than willing to provide that model and populate it for free if you've got a hold of me and you've got the email at the top of the slide, dmgbusinesscoaching@gmail.com. I will give you, and it says 30 minutes free. It's really not. I will take the time to build that model for you and spend some time on a Zoom call or a phone call to explain to you how it works. If you need more help beyond that point, if you're not able, don't have that financial advisor within your system that can help you understand it, I will charge $50 an hour after that, minimal for what I do. The other thing that I can do for help is I have a very interesting financial training program for non-financial managers. It's $350 for an online course, including the coaching book and course facilitation. I talked to the people who own the program on Thursday before our conference, and I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but Steve Lefevre, who runs BRS Systems in Seattle, has offered to facilitate this course himself, so that you'll have the developer of the course and the man who's on the video program doing your facilitation. Also, what you can do is, I used to work for the Small Business Development Centers until 2016. Every state in the union has a Small Business Development Center. Counseling is free. The Small Business Development Centers' salaries are paid by a combination of the SBA and usually a local community college or some local activities, and they will do counseling for free. You can find them. Again, there's a link here on the slide. Going to America's SBDC, it just tells you, just put your zip code in, it will give you the nearest address of the nearest SBDC. And I, having been with them for 6 years, they are a powerful organization, and I can't emphasize too much how you can get these business counselors who know what they're doing and they charge you nothing. So if you need some help and you need it locally and you don't have any resources and your budget is really tight, call the SBDC.
Yeah, and understand that we're not doing this to promote a business. We're doing this because we have been on phone calls with schools all over the country, and people are struggling, and people want anybody and everybody to be helping each other. And I think that's what this town hall has been all about, but it's also what we want to do. When I started making videos with Kasim's team at Nito Marketing, it wasn't about me. It was about creating something that we could all use, because we all have the same kinds of issues in our schools, big and small. And so this is really us just reaching out and saying, here's how we're willing to help you if you need our help.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
And we will send a copy of this presentation to Kasim in a PDF form. And as I understand, it's his intention that we'll put it up on the internet site. Thank you very much.